New York City is the richest city in the richest country in human history. And yet somehow it feels like it's being run like a third world free-for-all. People are getting shoved onto subway tracks. Stores are locking up toothpaste like it's gold bullion. And every time New Yorkers ask for order, they get the same response. We're working on it. But here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to say out loud. When politicians can't enforce law and order, someone else always does. And historically in New York, that someone else wasn't the police. It wasn't City Hall. It was the Mafia. Not the cartoon version from movies. Not the meme version. A real underground government with real rules, real consequences, and a real system. And that raises the most terrifying question imaginable. If modern leaders can't control New York, does New York start needing the Mafia again? Because today's criminals aren't organized. They aren't disciplined. They don't have codes. They don't have limits. They're chaos. And chaos is exactly what the original Mafia was invented to stop. Act 1. The Mafia wasn't born from evil. It was born from a vacuum. To understand why this question is even possible, you have to go back to where the Mafia actually began. Not New York, Sicily. Sicily in the 19th century wasn't a place with strong institutions. It was a place where the state was basically a scam. The courts were corrupt. The police were for sale. Politicians were puppets. And if you were a normal person, there was no such thing as justice. If someone stole your land, you couldn't call the government. If someone threatened your family, you couldn't rely on the law. If you had money, the government wanted a cut. If you didn't, the government didn't care if you lived or died. So society did what society always does. It created an alternative authority, not because people loved crime, but because they needed stability. The Mafia was originally a protection system, a shadow court, a private enforcement agency. In a world where the official government was weak and corrupt, the Mafia became the thing that enforced contracts, punished thieves, and settled disputes. Not out of morality, out of necessity. And here's the key point. The Mafia didn't become powerful because people wanted violence. They became powerful because people wanted order. That's the origin story. And if that sounds familiar, it should. Act 2. Old Mafia versus new criminals. Rules versus rage. When the Italian Mafia migrated to America, especially to New York, it evolved into something else. Still criminal, yes, but organized, structured, hierarchical. The American Mafia ran like a corporation with a street-level enforcement wing. And the reason they lasted so long wasn't just fear. It was discipline. They had rules that sound almost absurd today. You didn't rob random working-class people in your own neighborhood. You didn't cause chaos that brought heat to everyone. You didn't kill recklessly because murder brought federal attention. You had permission structures. You had consequences. The Mafia understood something modern criminals don't. Crime is only profitable when it's controlled. The Mafia didn't want anarchy. They wanted predictability, because predictability is what lets you run unions, construction, shipping, gambling, protection rackets, an entire underground economy. They weren't street predators. They were an alternative system. Now compare that to what we have today. Modern organized crime isn't even organized in the old sense. It's decentralized, flashy, hyper-violent, impulsive. It's crews, cliques, and social media-fueled chaos. Today's criminals don't follow a code. They follow clout. They don't avoid attention. They chase it. They don't treat violence like a tool. They treat it like entertainment. And the result is obvious. The streets don't feel controlled. They feel random, which is the worst kind of danger, because humans can tolerate a harsh system, but they can't tolerate unpredictability. A city can survive corruption. A city can survive inequality. But a city cannot survive a reality where nobody knows what rules exist anymore. And that's why the old Mafia, despite being criminal, had something today's chaos criminals don't: boundaries. Act 3. The modern problem, when the state stops acting like the state. Here's where the story gets uncomfortable. New York isn't collapsing because it lacks laws. New York has more laws than almost any place on earth. It's collapsing because the public no longer believes those laws will be enforced. And when people stop believing in enforcement, something changes psychologically. The law becomes a suggestion, and criminals sense that instantly. That's why you see open-air shoplifting. That's why you see brazen subway violence. That's why you see repeat offenders cycling in and out like the justice system is a revolving door. Not because crime is new, but because consequences feel optional. And that's the moment history starts repeating itself. Because in Sicily, the mafia didn't rise because people loved gangsters. They rose because the government stopped being a serious authority, so people outsourced order to something else. And now New York is drifting toward the same dangerous pattern. When politicians can't restore law and order, and when police are either restrained, hated, or politically neutered, society doesn't become peaceful. It becomes opportunistic. Then it becomes tribal. Then it becomes predatory. And eventually the public starts whispering the same things Sicilians whispered. At least when the other guys ran things, there were rules. That's the seductive part. That's the trap. Because it's easy to romanticize old organized crime as dignified, honorable, or structured. But what people are really saying is simpler. They miss consequences. And if the state refuses to provide consequences, someone else will. Not because they're heroes, because power hates a vacuum. So the real question isn't, does New York need the mafia again? The real question is, how bad does a society have to get before people start begging criminals to restore order? Because if you think it can't happen, Sicily already proved it can, and New York might be proving it again. Final act. The fact this sounds reasonable is the real scandal. Here's the part nobody wants to admit. The scariest thing about the idea of New York needing the mafia again isn't that it's true. It's that millions of people hear it and instantly think, yeah, I kind of get what you mean. That alone is an indictment of the modern system. Because in a healthy society, this thought wouldn't even exist. It wouldn't even be a conversation. It would sound insane. The only reason anyone can even entertain this theory is because the people in charge have failed at the most basic job government has: protecting the public, not issuing press conferences, not arguing on television, not producing slogans, protecting the public. And when citizens tell them, we feel unsafe, the response isn't action, it's excuses. Or worse, lectures. They get told it's not happening, or it's exaggerated, or it's complicated, or it's somehow morally wrong to even want consequences. But the average person isn't asking for utopia. They're asking for the bare minimum. Stop the random violence. Stop the repeat offenders. Stop letting the streets become lawless. Stop letting decent people feel like prey. And when leaders ignore those demands, it creates a deadly perception that they serve ideology before reality, that they serve donors before citizens, that they serve vested interests before neighborhoods. And at that point, government stops feeling like representation. It starts feeling like occupation. Because if the state won't listen to the people who elected it, then the state is no longer legitimate. It's just powerful. And history is very clear about what happens next. When official authority refuses to do its job, society doesn't just sit there and suffer forever. Eventually, the public starts improvising. At first it's private security, then it's armed neighborhood patrols, then it's community defense groups. New York needs something much simpler, a government that does its job. Because if the people running the city refuse to restore order, refuse to listen, refuse to act, then eventually someone else will. And they won't be elected, they'll be feared.